Hey folks, it's Ardwulf. Welcome. We're going to do something of a flip through today, but I'm also going to give you probably a lot of commentary, and I'm not sure how long this video is going to run. We're going to have a look at Rolemaster's Arms Law. This is the Rolemaster Classic version of Arms Law, so it's a combination of earlier books, and we'll talk about the history of the product and about the Rolemaster system and about its mechanics as we go. Before we start, I'd like to thank Iron Crown Enterprises for shooting me a PDF copy of this so that I could do this walkthrough, so thanks Iron Crown. Thanks also to the patrons of Ardwulf's Lair that have made this kind of content and the channel in general possible. You can find a link to the Patreon in the video description, along with links to the Ko-Fi and the merch store. So let's get started. Okay, so this is the new current version of Arms Law. Now, we might see a new version of Arms Law sometime this year. That's the plan for Rolemaster Unified, but that's not out yet, and it's been in development for actual eons. So we're gonna work with Rolemaster Classic. Now, Rolemaster Classic is not exactly, and we're gonna see where it isn't exactly just a recreation of what is now called Rolemaster Second Edition, which is the version that a lot of people may remember. It is the version before Rolemaster Standard System and Rolemaster Fantasy Role-Playing, which are mechanically almost identical, but which are broken up in different ways in terms of products. The Rolemaster Second Edition system and Rolemaster Classic are quite a lot simpler than Rolemaster Standard System and Rolemaster Fantasy Role-Playing. Rolemaster has a reputation for enormous complexity. Hopefully over the course of a couple of videos I can show you that that's actually nonsense. That's really not true. The system is quite simple. In fact, it's simpler than really any version of D&D than I can think of. But there are a lot of tables which a lot of people confuse with complexity. As we're going to see, there are just a few different kinds of tables, and you just have to know which one that you're going to roll on. So let's take a look at the Arms Law product. We've got a fairly nice cover and fairly nice interior art. This is apparently a 2007 product. Previous versions of Arms Law included, as sort of a legacy thing, an extra section about how to use Arms Law with other fantasy role-playing games. That is a tie to the original genesis of Arms Law as an add-on for whatever fantasy role-playing game before Rolemaster existed. The original Arms Law was, in fact, the first product of what would become Rolemaster. Despite that, I mean, obviously the intention was that you were going to use it with D&D, right? Although they never said that or named D&D for reasons which should be obvious. I don't feel like that was ever commonly done, with the possible exception of maybe leveraging the critical tables, which we will see later on in the walkthrough. So we do get an index of optional rules. There are a bunch of options in here, most of which don't date from Rolemaster. Well, they do date from Rolemaster Second Edition, but they don't date from that version of Arms Law. In addition, we're not going to really analyze this, but they have replaced the initiative system in this version of Arms Law as well. So that's the one mechanical thing that is actually fairly different from this version of Arms Law to the Rolemaster Second Edition version of Arms Law. It's a new initiative system. Initiative is one of those things that Rolemaster has never quite gotten right. The one that's in here, the original is presented as an option in the back of the book. The one that's in here is serviceable, but not amazing. We do have some of the basic novel concepts presented here in this introduction. And the big one is that most percentile rolls, it's a percentile-based system, and almost all rolls are going to be percentile rolls. You'll occasionally roll a d10 for something, but the rolls, those percentile rolls, are typically open-ended. And what that means in the context of Rolemaster, this is a concept that predates the exploding dice of other game systems by many, many years, is essentially that if on the percentile dice you roll 96 to 100, the roll has open-ended. You are then going to roll again and add your new result to the original result. And if that second roll is also 96 to 100, you're going to add that to the original result and roll again, so you can theoretically open-end multiple times. Now, we played Rolemaster for many years, and I think I saw a quadruple open-ended roll one time. But just as you can open-end high, you can also open-end low. So if you roll, and you roll a 2, roll a 5 or less, then you have open-ended low, and you're going to roll again, and you're going to subtract that new result from your original roll, okay? And you can open-end low multiple times as well. So any number is theoretically, mathematically possible in Rolemaster, and when we look at the tables, we're going to see that They don't just stop at 100. The other books, I'm going to mention this briefly, even though we're not going to really talk about any of these concepts in detail, that make up Rolemaster in this edition are Character Law and Spell Law. And there is another book called Creatures and Treasures, which contains creatures and treasures. So now that we know the die mechanic, there's a section of definitions. This is all stuff you need to know, but it's not terribly complicated. In general, Rolemaster front loads all of the bookkeeping into character creation. So you're really not doing quite as much math as you might think in the actual gameplay, but you're doing it in character creation instead. So just as D&D has armor classes, which is just a numerical rating, Rolemaster has an armor type, and this is a finite range, right? There is no theoretical best armor class in D&D. In whatever version of D&D, you can have negative armor classes or positive armor classes or however it works. In this case, in Rolemaster, you have armor types 1 through 20, and each of those represents a specific type of armor. So, for example, armor type 5 is a leather jerkin. Armor type 7 is a reinforced leather coat. Armor type 9 is a leather breastplate, so on and so forth. And AT1, you're just wearing normal clothing, and if you're AT20, you are in full plate. So there are kind of 5 categories here. There's kind of the cloth or skin base. There's the soft leather base, there's the rigid leather base, the chainmail base, and the plate base, and then each of those classes or categories has 4 different types in it. And this allows, as we'll see, the individual weapons to have different types of effects against different types of armor. The armor types here do not include things like vambraces and greaves or helmets, or shields for that matter. Shields just add to your defensive bonus. You can absolutely have those things, and they will protect you from certain types of critical results, which we may or may not actually locate. So as a defending character, you have basically 2 defenses. You have an armor value, an armor type, and a defensive bonus. The defensive bonus, or DB as we call it, is a direct negative, generally negative modifier against people's attempts to attack you. A shield increases your DB against those opponents that you can block with the shield. You can't just block all incoming attacks with the shield. It has to be from the right side, and you can only block 1 attack per round with the shield. So you only get that extra DB from the shield that once. There's also a skill called Adrenal Defense, which adds to your DB directly, but you can't wear armor with it. That is a thing that we may talk about if we manage to do a character law video down the line. So you have an armor type and a defensive bonus. That is your defensive capability. You also have an offensive capability, the offensive bonus, okay? The offensive bonus is basically just your skill in the weapon, right? If you have a plus 80 bonus in mace, well, that's your offensive bonus, that plus 80 in mace. Now, you can allocate that either to attack or to defense. So you can parry with it. So let's say I have that 80 in mace and I want to dedicate a quarter of that, so 20 points to parrying. Then my effective offensive bonus is 60. My effective defensive bonus is 20 more than what it normally was. So, and that's a kind of a key thing to remember to do in Rolemaster, is to parry. If you want to all-out attack all the time, there's an excellent chance you're going to end up dead. We do have some stuff in here that is also in character law. These are bonuses for stat values. That is also in character law. That's built into the game. By the time you get to a combat, you know all that. These are essentially all of the die roll modifiers for the attack roll. So I'm going to break down the Rolemaster system here, and it's a little more complicated than this, but not very much. Essentially, if you are going to do something, whether that's attack or jump over a chasm or ride a horse or whatever it is, roll percentile dice, you add your bonus to that activity, whatever it is, and you look the result up on a table. And there's a couple of different kinds of tables. There isn't in Rolemaster Classic and Rolemaster 2nd Edition a table for every skill. That is incorrect. It's incorrect even in Rolemaster Standard System, which does have a table for every skill category, but it's not true here. There are actually 2 basic skill resolution tables, plus the combat stuff, which we'll be looking at now. There is a static actions table for if you're just sitting and thinking, and there is a moving maneuver table if you're moving around, jumping over chasms and stuff like that. And then you apply that skill bonus, you look up that result on that particular table. So to do general non-combat actions, there's 2 tables. Non-combat, non-spellcasting actions, there's 2 tables. There's the static action table and the moving maneuver table. And then there are, of course, die roll modifiers to those rolls, but this pretty much sums it up, right? And we more or less internalized all this when we were playing in a pretty short time. There are some options here which we're not going to go through, including things like shield bash, martial arts. Here are the weapon statistics. These do have some armor modifications based on the armor type that you're attacking. So a woodsman's axe is at -5 because it's not a combat weapon. It's -5 against everything. A blowgun is -5 on armor types 20 to 17, but +10 on 16 to 13. These aren't technically optional, but I will tell you straight up that we never used them, and they're a bit of a pain to calculate on the fly because you actually have to, know it, right? You have to actually look at it and determine what the modifier is based on the opponent's armor type. So we actually never used it, and we didn't feel like it was particularly necessary. There's also each ranged weapon has an individual range modifier based on the range. These we did use, maybe because we were less dependent on ranged weapons than we should have been. Ranged weapons are fantastic in Rolemaster because you don't get hit in melee if you are shooting at range. The combat system here is very deadly, if I haven't made that clear already. We have the tactical combat sequence. And again, this is new to the Rolemaster Classic book. The original is included in an appendix in the back. They have the combat resolution turn sequence. We do roll initiative, and there are some modifiers to initiative. We declare initial actions, then we roll initiative, and we resolve those actions, and they can be either short actions or long actions. This is less convoluted than the original system and is, like I mentioned, a fairly workable turn sequence and initiative system. The original system had this sort of very involved thing where spells had their own phase, and it was hard to deal with. And it's another one of those things that most groups ended up house ruling back in the day. Again, we have a bunch more options here. We have maneuvering and movement. This is the moving maneuver stuff that I talked to you about before. This also includes the move maneuver penalty for encumbrance. This does have an effect on combat, so this is kind of where it should go. So then we get to combat resolution, and exactly the process, the relatively straightforward and simple process that I gave you before. You decide what you're going to do, you roll percentile, you add the modifiers, you have a final result, you look that result up on a table. That is the Rolemaster combat system as well. It's just that instead of rolling on the static action table or the moving maneuver table, you are rolling on a weapon table. Let's use the battle axe as our example here. So if I am wielding a battle axe, I will roll my attack on the battle axe table. And you'll see that the print's fairly small here. The results go up to 150 because you can, after all, open in the rolls. And your ability to penetrate armor depends on the type of armor it is. Remember that these armor types don't it's not just a number, it represents a specific configuration of protective gear. So if I am wearing full plate, I am armor type 20, and it is very hard to do a critical to me in that full plate armor. So the way that every weapon will behave differently against every different armor type. And this is why it's kind of built into the tables. This is why we didn't use the weapon modifiers by armor type from the table before, because it's already built in. So you'll notice that I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, just so you can find this a little bit clearer. So you'll notice that, hey, if I roll 120 and I'm attacking armor type 17, I do a 17 CK. Well, what the hell does that mean? What that means is that you've done what we would read that off as is a 17C crush. For this purpose, crush is spelled with a K because it's harder to mistake a K for a 0 as opposed to a C. So you'll do a 17C crush. That means you have done 17 concussion hits. That's basically your hit points. When you run out, you're dead. When you run out, you're dying, I should say. But the real damage is done when you do the critical. And criticals are rated A through E. And A is the lightest type of critical, and E is the heaviest type of critical. And that is the fourth table type that we see in Rolemaster. So in addition, we'll keep that result, that 17C crush. You'll notice that There's a lot of different weapon tables. This does mean that the players, not just the game master, really need to show up to the session prepared. If my character wields a short sword and a longbow, then I am going to have the short sword and the longbow tables photocopied with my character sheet, so I can quickly roll and find out my own combat results. So when we get down to the end of the weapons, we have a series of natural weapon attack tables for things like beaks and pinchers and bites. Brawling is a natural attack. These work slightly differently. You'll actually have like a maximum level that you can get to, and these, of course, are in landscape format. So on the bite table here, for example, if it's a small bite attack, which you would get on the monster listing, whether it's a small or a medium or large or huge or whatever, then your results cap out at 105. If it's a medium, they cap out at 120, so on and so forth. Otherwise, this functions exactly the same. Now, the other types of criticals that you might see on the attack tables, the weapon attack tables are pretty much punctures. P is puncture, S is slash, K is crush. On the natural weapon attack tables, you also see G's for grapples, U for unbalance, and T for tiny. And those are just different types of critical tables. So here we are at the grappling and crush critical strike tables. So let's roll our critical strike on the C column here. There are no DRMs to this roll. There's no modifiers. It's a straight percentile roll. It's not open-ended. You get what you get. There are certain special things in the game that can modify the critical result roll, but generally speaking, that does not happen. So let's say we roll a 72. So we look up a 72 on the C crush, and we get a descriptive critical value. Blow bruises foe's knee. Foe is at -40, plus 10 hits. Foe is stunned and unable to parry for 2 rounds. So that tells us, hey, okay, so you hit the foe in the knee with this mace. The foe is at a -40 penalty. Now, the Game Master has some flexibility in determining what that means, right? Is that a combat penalty? Yeah, it pretty much always is. It's probably a general moving maneuver penalty too, until such time as medical attention is received. Plus 10 hits is exactly what it sounds like. That's 10 more concussion hits. The foe is also stunned and unable to parry for 2 rounds. So if you are stunned, you cannot attack, at least the way we played it. So stunning opponents, and stunned and unable to parry as well, which is even better. Now, defending with a shield is not a parry. That's defending with a shield. They both add to your defensive bonus. But stunned and unable to parry for 2 rounds is 2 rounds where you're pretty much a sitting duck. So that is a pretty good critical result, and a result that I don't want to get as a Rolemaster player. Now, as we've said, there are a bunch of different critical strike types. Grappling crush. Next page would be martial arts strikes. There are 2. We're not going to get into this in this video, but there are 2 types of martial arts. They work exactly the same way. There are strikes and sweeps and throws. They have their own critical tables. There are punctures, which can be very deadly and can cause bleeding, which is bad. Bleeding is basically just concussion hits per round. But if you're bleeding at 4 or 5 hits a round, man, you don't got long. So that can be a very big deal. Crushes obviously don't generally do many bleeds, but they also do like more broken bones and things like that. So you get these, in addition to just the hit points that you dealt, you also are dealing specific injuries that then have to get repaired somehow. And there's a number of different ways to do that. You can do that with healing magic, which is not as simple in Rolemaster as just the cleric casts Cure Light Wounds on you. You actually have to heal the specific injury as well. And when you start looking, and we'll get to see this if we do a video on spell law, you'll get to see the healer lists and the lay healer lists will actually heal those specific injuries. So it's a big deal. There are also herbs that you can use to heal these injuries as well. All right, next is the tiny. Tiny is like insect stings and stuff like that. That's the intention. Now, in general, the higher the result that you got on the critical table, the deadlier the result is. So if I go to the tiny critical result and I roll a 99, slash foe's Achilles tendon. Foe is knocked down and stunned and unable to parry for 3 rounds. Foe takes plus 1 hit per round, operates at -75. So again, stunned and unable to parry for 3 rounds, takes 1 hit per round. It doesn't say that that's bleeding, but I would interpret that as bleeding, and operates at -75 because they've got one leg that's no longer functional. And again, that penalty applies until medical attention is got. So these are the large and super large critical tables, and these work a little bit differently than the other ones in that these rolls can be modified and are open-ended, but that's because if you are attacking and you do a critical to a large or super large creature, and that's, again, designated in the monster in the stat block, you can't do regular criticals to them. You have to do one of these, and these can be one of several types: normal, magic, mithril, holy arms, or slaying. So if you have a axe of slaying giants, then this is the column that it is going to go on, and it's going to be, it's going to be fairly deadly, right? And this is an open-ended table. And you get a modifier based on if you did an A, B, C, or D, or E on this table as well. And these are the only two that work like that, the large and super large. There are fumble tables. If you have rolled it's a moving maneuver and or a result on the combat table, end up rolling a fumble either with a weapon or with a non-weapon attack. These are those fumble tables. So if I roll once again a 92 with my battle axe, you stumble and nearly fall down in an apparent attempt to commit suicide. You are stunned 4 rounds. Notice it doesn't say you can't parry. It's just that you're stunned. So you got to read these things literally. If I roll a 92 when I tried to do a natural attack, I would slip on a wet spot on the floor. I go down hard. I am stunned for 2 rounds. A lot of the narrative of Rolemaster combat and the joy of Rolemaster combat comes out of these critical tables. This is what makes Rolemaster combat pretty fun. It's also very deadly, so be prepared to lose characters. Now we've got a section on monster and animal statistics here. This is kind of, here's a quick and dirty guide for a lot of animals and some basic monsters, just so you can play with Arms Law without necessarily having Creatures and Treasures. But Creatures and Treasures will be your definitive Rolemaster monster book. There is a Creatures and Treasures 2, which has not been redone as far as I'm aware. So here's an appendix containing web extras, including the original Rolemaster 2nd Edition round sequence. Here is the moving maneuver table that I mentioned before. Now, the other 2 types of tables that are used in Rolemaster are the spell attack tables, which look exactly like those natural weapon attack tables, except that you roll on, them based on your skill with the spell. There are also spell critical type tables, which work exactly like the regular weapon damage critical tables. And there is a spell casting table, the spell static action table, that you'll use to determine the results on certain types of resisted type of spells. And there is also a mechanic, a resistance roll, which is, again, a percentile roll. You add your bonus and you're looking to achieve a specific target number. Generally, that's 101. So this has been a pretty brief, I hope, look and with quite a bit of commentary and rules explanation about Rolemaster Classic. Now, of course, I haven't played Rolemaster Classic, but I played an awful lot of Rolemaster 2nd Edition back in the day, and Rolemaster Standard System for that matter. These are games that I remember fondly. We may do some more Rolemaster content in the future. I am on the hook for a similar treatment of character law and spell law as well. So if you'd like to see those, please do mention that in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, please comment and subscribe. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, happy gaming.